Hi guys, welcome to our channel. It's Em
and Lloyd, and today we're doing something a little bit different. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos that we're going to be putting out on how we meal prep.
Today we're going to break this video up into two parts. First, we're going to talk about some of the things that we actually think about when it comes to meal prep, and second, we're going to show you some of our actual cooking process. As we mentioned before, our meal prep process involves preparing a protein and some vegetables. This week we're getting a brisket from our butcher, so we'll show you guys today the process of how we're going to prepare that for our meal prep.
So the first thing that we consider is that usually when we're bringing meals to work, we'll eat them at lunch as opposed to dinner. Now of course sometimes there are social obligations at lunchtime that clash with this, but there are two main reasons why we do this. So the first reason that we eat our meal prep for lunch as opposed to dinner is because lunch is a really important meal in the day and we have full control over what we bring to eat in the office.
My options for lunch are a lot more limited because I have to stay somewhere near the office. However, my work allows me to come home for dinner and continue working afterwards if I need, which gives me a lot more flexibility. When I'm at home, I get a lot more flexibility because I have access to the fridge. So I can cook something quick for myself using the meal prep that we've already prepared, or I can order from one of the restaurants near home.
So because we know that we're bringing in meals for lunch, we try to make sure that our meal prep is fit for purpose. We find that for both of us, if we eat a meal that has a lot of carbohydrates, we tend to get really tired after we have lunch. We find that tiredness and that lethargic feeling really affects our productivity a lot in the office, and we often have to stay later than we ordinarily would have had to finish all of our work for the day. So usually, our meal prep is high in good fats, moderate in protein, and low in carbohydrates, which really helps to fuel us for the rest of the day when we're trying to get our work done. Now, we've talked in a previous video about how we always want to bring food to the office that we look forward to eating, and seasonality, climate, and weather have a huge impact on this. For example, if we prep a bunch of piping hot stew or chili, it's not really the kind of thing that you look forward to eating in a hot summer's day in Hong Kong. Similarly, a fresh and zesty salad may not be the kind of thing that you look forward to eating if you're in a particularly cold climate or if it's in the middle of winter. So when we're thinking about prepping our meals for the week, we always think about what season we're in and how the weather is going to affect our preferences for what we want to eat. So we just got our weekly delivery from the butcher. Let's see what we have this week. This week, we got some mango leads of pork salami, some wild Hereford beef hanger steak, some middle white pork pluma, which is a butcher steak, some black pudding, and belted Galloway brisket, which is going to be our meal prep for this week. First off, since we get our deliveries on a Friday morning, we usually unwrap and store our meal prep meat unwrapped in the fridge on a wire rack. This is a great way to store meat and lets it dry age a bit in the fridge. Now it's fine to skip the dry aging process if you're planning on picking up your protein from a butcher or the supermarket on the same day. This is just an optional step which helps with storage and adds a bit of flavor too if time allows. Now we're fortunate to get grass-fed, grass-finished meats from a butcher, which allows us to trace the origins of where our meat comes from and know that the animals are raised sustainably and raised well. We avoid factory farm meats at all costs, and often don't eat meat when we go to restaurants if we don't know where it came from. For our weekly prep, because we're in control, we choose to go for something which is more humanely raised and which fits with our values. On top of this, it is becoming increasingly clear the value that grazing animals bring to the ecosystem and to the environment. Grazing animals do a lot to help maintain or even enhance soil health, which is essential for capturing carbon out of the atmosphere and storing it in complex root systems underneath the ground. Check out the links in the description below for some videos we love on this topic which talk about this in greater detail. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is to take your protein out of the fridge a couple of hours before you want to use it. You want the entire piece to come to room temperature so that it cooks evenly. If the meat is stone cold in the middle, the outside will cook but the inside will stay raw. Usually, the morning of the day that we intend to meal prep, we take our meat out first thing and leave it on the kitchen counter. While the meat is cold, it's a really good time to have a look and see if you want to trim off any of the fat on the piece that you have. We like to keep a good amount of the fat on because we eat generally low carb and somewhat higher fat, and the benefit of getting grass-fed meats is that the quality of the fat is very, very high and there's a lot of nutrition stored in the fat. But if you feel like trimming off any of the fat, it's best to do it while cold, as it's much easier to work with fat when it's cold and hardened. We definitely do recommend leaving some fat on because it helps to baste the meat as it cooks and adds a lot of flavor. You also want to make sure not to throw away any of the fat that you trim off. Fat cut off like this can be rendered down into tallow, which can be used for cooking or even making some household things like candles and soaps. We try to reduce waste overall, but have a specific rule in our household where we absolutely don't waste any animal products ever. We try to find a use for everything, and we usually keep a running container in the freezer with bits of fat trim and render it all down at once when we have collected enough to do so. So next, while we wait for our meat to come to temperature, we want to prepare a good seasoning rub. Now there are a lot of store-bought options which are really great these days, and certain brands are sold directly at some butcher shops or supermarkets. So if you want to save time and you know there's something you like, stock up on 1 or 2 options and switch between them as needed. As we mentioned in previous videos, we like to switch up our meal prep each week to make sure we mix it up and introduce some variety with sauces and condiments. So usually we keep our seasoning blend quite simple so it's possible to mix and match flavors. This week, we're working with a brisket, so we did a simple rub of garlic powder, onion powder, hot paprika, and salt. And a simple ratio to follow is 1 heaped teaspoon of each seasoning with 1 heaped teaspoon of salt per teaspoon of other seasoning. Now this may seem like a lot of salt, but we're also working with a very large piece of meat, so remember that it distributes quite evenly when it cooks. You then want to mix up your seasoning blend until it's uniform and rub it all over the meat. This can be done up to a night before cooking to let the seasoning really get in there. But firstly, if you're really tight on time, it's fine to do this right before cooking. And secondly, if you're picking some really good quality grass-fed meat, it'll have amazing flavor on its own anyways, and the seasoning is just extra. We like to season on a cutting board so that we catch all the seasoning that falls off. And when we finish on the main sides of the meat, we pick it up and stamp it all over the seasoning left on the board to make sure that we pick it all up and season the entirety of our meat. Once your seasoning is done, admire your work for a second. This step is important, before getting ready to pop it into the oven. Next, you want to prepare your cooking vessel. We use a roasting tray with aluminum foil, which works great. But keep in mind that a lot of fat renders out as this cooks, so if your tray is too shallow, it can have rendered out fat and juices leak out as it cooks. To counter this, we use 2 sheets of aluminum foil. A tip here is to make sure that the sheet going across the wider portion of the roasting tray is longer so that it can wrap around and seal the brisket as it cooks in the oven. Now this is a really important point. For meats that slow cook in the oven, you always want to do a sear on them together with a good amount of time cooking them low and slow. Usually, we sear the brisket first, but on this day we had something to run out and do, so we decided to reverse the order and do a reverse sear instead. For our reverse sear, you want to pop the brisket in the center of your roasting tray and seal up the foil. You want to crimp the edges together to create a bit of a seal and cover up the brisket entirely. Now it's important to note at this stage before sealing that it is possible to add some beef stock or other liquids to steam the brisket as it slow roasts, which can help make it more tender and flaky. If you do have some stock sitting around, it's absolutely worth pouring some into your roasting dish before sealing it up anyways, but we'll show you what this looks like without it, and you'll see that it's still plenty juicy coming out of the oven the way that we've done it. Now from here, you want to preheat your oven to around 150 degrees Celsius or 300 degrees Fahrenheit and pop in the brisket fully covered for 3 to 4 hours for a 2 kilo piece of meat. After the 3 to 4 hours are up, you want to turn the temperature up to 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit, take your brisket out of the oven and fully uncover it, and then put it back into the oven for another 30 minutes to give it a good sear. After these 30 minutes are up, pull it out of the oven, take a second to admire your juicy and wobbly brisket, then seal the foil back up. Be careful with this step as it will be very hot coming out of the oven. You want to let the brisket rest fully covered for at least 2 hours. It's been cooking for a very long time, so you want to make sure you give it enough time for the juices to all settle back in. After resting, pull out your brisket and pop it on your cutting board to get it ready for slicing and serving. But before cutting into the brisket, make sure you reserve all the fat and drippings in the roasting tray. Again, since we're using high quality grass-fed meat, we don't want to waste any of this fat since it's great for cooking and making sauces. To avoid making a mess, we recommend tipping out the fat into a measuring cup and then pouring it into a clean, sealable jar. Once it's in the jar, attempt to put on the lid before you realize that you have the wrong lid. It's not the right lid. Oh my god, it's not the right lid. Wait, what the hell? What lid is it? Then go back to your cabinet and try to find the correct lid, and once the correct lid is on, store your fat in the fridge and use it for cooking anything from root vegetables, eggs, or even salad dressings. Now, all that's left to do is to grab a sharp knife and cut into your brisket and enjoy. Make sure you remember when you're cutting the brisket to cut against the grain of the meat. We store it all in large Tupperware boxes pre-sliced so that when we're packing meal prep boxes, all we need to do is remove it and pack it in with vegetables that we make throughout the week. We usually eat our meal prep throughout the week in different flavor combinations and with different sauces and condiments to switch it up so it never gets boring. We'll share more about our favorite ways to repurpose and enjoy our meal prep in a future video in this series. If you made it this far, here are some juicy and thick shots of this brisket for you all to enjoy.
Thanks a lot for watching, guys. If you like this video, please hit that like button below and consider subscribing.
And there are more videos to come in this series, but if you have any thoughts on other food related videos you'd like to see, please let us know in the comments.